Chapter 16. It was the 6th of May, corresponding to the 6th of November in the Northern Hemisphere. For some days the sky had been cloudy, and it was important to make provision against winter. However, the temperature had not lessened much, and a centigrade thermometer transported to Lincoln Island would have averaged 10 degrees or 12 degrees above zero. This would not be surprising, since Lincoln Island, from its probable situation in the southern hemisphere, was subject to the same climatic influences as Greece or Sicily in the northern. But just as the intense cold in Greece and Sicily sometimes produces snow and ice, so, in the height of winter, this island would probably experience sudden changes in the temperature against which it would be well to provide. At any rate, if the cold was not threatening, the rainy season was at hand, and upon this desolate island, in the wide Pacific, exposed to all the inclemency of the elements, the storms would be frequent, and, probably, terrible. The question of a more comfortable habitation than the Chimneys ought, therefore, to be seriously considered, and promptly acted upon. Pencroff, having discovered the Chimneys, naturally had a predilection for them, but he understood very well that another place must be found. This refuge had already been visited by the sea, and it would not do to expose themselves to a like accident. Moreover, added Smith, who was discussing these things with his companions, there are some precautions to take. Why? The island is not inhabited, said the reporter. Probably not, answered the engineer, although we have not yet explored the whole of it, but if there are no human beings, I believe dangerous beasts are numerous. So it will be better to provide a shelter against a possible attack, than for one of us to be tending the fire every night. And then, my friends, we must foresee everything. We are here in a part of the Pacific often frequented by Malay pirates. What, at this distance from land? Exclaimed Herbert. Yes, my boy, these pirates are hardy sailors as well as formidable villains, and we must provide for them accordingly. Well, said Pencroff, we will fortify ourselves against 2- and 4-footed savages. But, sir, wouldn't it be as well to explore the island thoroughly before doing anything else? It would be better, added Spilett, who knows but we may find on the opposite coast one or more of those caves which we have looked for here in vain. Very true, answered the engineer, but you forget, my friends, that we must be somewhere near running water, and that from Mount Franklin we were unable to see either brook or river in that direction. Here, on the contrary, we are between the Mersey and Lake Grant, which is an advantage not to be neglected, and, moreover, as this coast faces the east, it is not as exposed to the trade winds, which blow from the northwest in this hemisphere. Well, then, Mr. Smith, replied the sailor, let us build a house on the edge of the lake. We are no longer without bricks and tools. After having been brickmakers, potters, founders, and smiths, we ought to be masons easily enough. Yes, my friend, but before deciding it will be well to look about. A habitation already made would save us a great deal of work, and would, doubtless, offer a surer retreat, in which we would be safe from enemies, native as well as foreign. But, Cyrus, answered the reporter, have we not already examined the whole of this great granite wall without finding even a hole? No, not one, added Pencroff. If we could only dig a place in it high out of reach, that would be the thing. I can see it now, on the part overlooking the sea, 5 or 6 chambers. With windows, said Herbert, laughing. And a staircase, added Nebraska. Why do you laugh? Cried the sailor. Haven't we picks and mattocks? Cannot Mr. Smith make powder to blow up the mine? You will be able, won't you, sir, to make powder when we want it? The engineer had listened to the enthusiastic sailor developing these imaginative projects. To attack this mass of granite, even by mining, was an Herculean task, and it was truly vexing that nature had not helped them in their necessity. But he answered Pencroff, by simply proposing to examine the wall more attentively, from the mouth of the river to the angle which ended it to the north. They therefore went out and examined it most carefully for about 2 miles. But everywhere it rose, uniform and upright, without any visible cavity. The rock pigeons flying about its summit had their nests in holes drilled in the very crest, or upon the irregularly cut edge of the granite. To attempt to make a sufficient excavation in such a massive wall even with pickaxe and powder was not to be thought of. It was vexatious enough. By chance, Pencroff had discovered in the Chimneys, which must now be abandoned, the only temporary, habitable shelter on this part of the coast. When the survey was ended, the colonists found themselves at the northern angle of the wall, where it sunk by long declivities to the shore. From this point to its western extremity it was nothing more than a sort of talus composed of stones, earth, and sand bound together by plants, shrubs, and grass, in a slope of about 45 degrees. Here and there the granite thrust its sharp points out from the cliff. Groups of trees grew over these slopes and there was a thin carpet of grass. But the vegetation extended but a short distance, and then the long stretch of sand, beginning at the foot of the talus, merged into the beach. Smith naturally thought that the overflow of the lake fell in this direction, as the excess of water from Red Creek must be discharged somewhere, and this point had not been found less on the side already explored, that is to say from the mouth of the creek westward as far as Prospect Plateau. The engineer proposed to his companions that they clamber up the talus and return to the Chimneys by the heights, exploring the eastern and western shores of the lake. The proposition was accepted, and, in a few minutes, Herbert and Neb had climbed to the plateau, the others following more leisurely. 200 feet distant the beautiful sheet of water shone through the leaves in the sunlight. The landscape was charming. The trees in autumn tints were harmoniously grouped. Some huge old weather-beaten trunks stood out in sharp relief against the green turf which covered the ground, and brilliant cockatoos, like moving prisms, glanced among the branches, uttering their shrill screams. The colonists, instead of proceeding directly to the north bank of the lake, bore along the edge of the plateau, so as to come back to the mouth of the creek, on its left bank. It was a circuit of about 1.5 miles. The walk was easy, as the trees, set wide apart, left free passage between them. They could see that the fertile zone stopped at this point, and that the vegetation here was less vigorous than anywhere between the creek and the Mersey. Smith and his companions moved cautiously over this unexplored neighborhood. Bows and arrows and iron-pointed sticks were their sole weapons. But no beast showed itself, and it was probable that the animals kept to the thicker forests in the south. The colonists, however, experienced a disagreeable sensation in seeing Top stop before a huge serpent 14 or 15 feet long. Neb killed it at a blow. Smith examined the reptile, and pronounced it to belong to the species of diamond serpents eaten by the natives of New South Wales and not venomous, but it was possible others existed whose bite was mortal, such as the fork-tailed deaf viper, which rise up under the foot, or the winged serpents, furnished with 2 ear-like appendages, which enable them to shoot forward with extreme rapidity. Top, having gotten over his surprise, pursued these reptiles with reckless fierceness, and his master was constantly obliged to call him in. The mouth of Red Creek, where it emptied into the lake, was soon reached. The party recognized on the opposite bank the point visited on their descent from Mount Franklin. Smith ascertained that the supply of water from the creek was considerable, there therefore must be an outlet for the overflow somewhere. It was this place which must be found, as, doubtless, it made a fall which could be utilized as a motive power. The colonists, strolling along, without, however, straying too far from each other, began to follow round the bank of the lake, which was very abrupt. The water was full of fishes, and Pencroff promised himself soon to manufacture some apparatus with which to capture them. It was necessary first to double the point at the northeast. They had thought that the discharge would be here, as the water flowed close to the edge of the plateau. But as it was not here, the colonists continued along the bank, which, after a slight curve, followed parallel with the seashore. On this side the bank was less wooded, but clumps of trees, here and there, made a picturesque landscape. The whole extent of the lake, unmoved by a single ripple, was visible before them. Top, beating the bush, flushed many coveys of birds, which Spilett and Herbert saluted with their arrows. One of these birds, cleverly hit by the lad, dropped in the rushes. Top, rushing after it, brought back a beautiful slate-colored waterfowl. It was a coot, as large as a big partridge, belonging to the group of Machiodactyls, which form the division between the waders and the palmiped. Poor game and bad tasting, but as Top was not as difficult to please as his masters, it was agreed that the bird would answer for his supper. Then the colonists, following the southern bank of the lake, soon came to the place they had previously visited. The engineer was very much surprised, as he had seen no indication of an outlet to the surplus water. In talking with the reporter and the sailor, he did not conceal his astonishment. At this moment, Top, who had been behaving himself quietly, showed signs of alarm. The intelligent animal, running along the bank, suddenly stopped, with one foot raised, and looked into the water as if pointing some invisible game. Then he barked furiously, questioning it, as it were, and again was suddenly silent. At first neither Smith nor his companions paid any attention to the dog's actions, but his barking became so incessant, that the engineer noticed it. "What is it, Top?" he called. The dog bounded towards his master, and, showing a real anxiety, rushed back to the bank. Then, suddenly, he threw himself into the lake. "Come back here, Top," cried the engineer, not wishing his dog to venture in those suppositious waters. "What's going on under there?" asked the sailor, examining the surface of the lake. "Top has smelt something amphibious," answered Herbert. "It must be an alligator," said the reporter. "I don't think so," answered Smith. "Alligators are not met with in this latitude." Meantime, Top came ashore at the call of his master, but he could not be quiet. He rushed along the bank, through the tall grass, and, guided by instinct, seemed to be following some object, invisible under the water, which was hugging the shore. Nevertheless, the surface was calm and undisturbed by a ripple. Often the colonists stood still on the bank and watched the water, but they could discover nothing. There certainly was some mystery here, and the engineer was much perplexed. "We will follow out this exploration," he said. In half an hour all had arrived at the southeast angle of the lake, and were again upon Prospect Plateau. They had made the circle of the bank without the engineer having discovered either where or how the surplus water was discharged. "Nevertheless, this outlet exists," he repeated, "and, since it is not outside, it must penetrate the massive granite of the coast." "And why do you want to find that out?" asked Spilett. "Because," answered the engineer, "if the outlet is through the solid rock, it is possible that there is some cavity, which could be easily rendered habitable, after having turned the water in another direction." "But may not the water flow into the sea, through a subterranean outlet at the bottom of the lake?" asked Herbert. "Perhaps so," answered Smith, "and in that case, since nature has not aided us, we must build our house ourselves." As it was 5 o'clock, the colonists were thinking of returning to the chimneys across the plateau, when Top again became excited, and, barking with rage, before his master could hold him, he sprang a second time into the lake. Every one ran to the bank. The dog was already 20 feet off, and Smith called to him to come back, when suddenly an enormous head emerged from the water. Herbert instantly recognized it, the comical face, with huge eyes and long silky mustaches. "A manatee," he cried. Although not a manatee, it was a dugong, which belongs to the same species. The huge monster threw himself upon the dog. His master could do nothing to save him, and, before Spilett or Herbert could draw their bows, Top, seized by the dugong, had disappeared under the water. Neb, spear in hand, would have sprung to the rescue of the dog, and attacked the formidable monster in its own element, had he not been held back by his master. Meanwhile a struggle was going on under the water, a struggle which, owing to the powerlessness of the dog, was inexplicable, a struggle which, they could see by the agitation of the surface, was becoming more terrible each moment, in short, a struggle which could only be terminated by the death of the dog. But suddenly, through the midst of a circle of foam, Top appeared, shot upward by some unknown force, rising 10 feet in the air, and falling again into the tumultuous waters, from which he escaped to shore without any serious wounds, miraculously saved. Cyrus Smith and his companions looked on amazed. Still more inexplicable, it seemed as if the struggle under water continued. Doubtless the dugong, after having seized the dog, had been attacked by some more formidable animal, and had been obliged to defend itself. But this did not last much longer. The water grew red with blood, and the body of the dugong, emerging from the waves, floated on to a little shoal at the southern angle of the lake. The colonists ran to where the animal lay, and found it dead. Its body was enormous, measuring between 15 and 16 feet long and weighing between 3,000 and 4,000 pounds. On its neck yawned a wound, which seemed to have been made by some sharp instrument. What was it that had been able, by this terrible cut, to kill the formidable dugong? None of them could imagine, and, preoccupied with these incidents, they returned to the Chimneys.